Monkey Magic was a late 90s Japanese animated series running 13 episodes, combining both traditional animation techniques and some elements of CG, which were just becoming more widely available at the time, and serves as a loose adaptation of the Chinese novel Journey to the West, not to be confused with the live-action series simply titled Monkey. Now, while this sounds wholly unremarkable, on the grounds that there are so many anime adaptations of Journey to the West that it's essentially a cliche these days, there is one thing that makes this particular instance somewhat significant. Or significant to me, at least. It was actually the first such adaptation of the story that I personally was ever exposed to. Sure, I'd later go on to see classic Dragon Ball and its many sequel series, and many other similar stories like Shinzo later on, but I was a late arrival to that gravy train. And I remember enjoying the show despite the fact that it was, in a word, completely insane. And I just randomly recalled that there was, in fact, a PS1 tie-in game which loosely adapts the story of the anime and how, as a small snack, I couldn't find the thing no matter how hard I looked. But now, I'm a grown-up, and it's time to revisit this oddity. So join me for a closer look at the PS1's Monkey Magic. Greetings everyone, this is the Hipster Snack, and today we'll be looking at the 1999 PS1 title, Monkey Magic. Fun fact, this game was released in North America first, and it wasn't until July of 2000 that Japan got it. How random. Anyway, that said, the game opens with, well, the opening sequence. Yeah, the actual intro and theme song sequence, with only very minor pixelation. I'm legitimately impressed, not only because of that, but that when starting a new game we get several minutes long cutscene taken straight from the source material. And the quality is pretty good. Not that it's at all surprising to have FMVs in a PS1 game, but it was just much longer than I expected and of really high quality. Naturally, this means the voice cast of the show are all present and accounted for the sake of the game as well, and it gives a simple overview of the broad story. So, time for a breakdown. The world's broken up into three major planes of existence: the physical world, the netherworld, and the celestial heavens. We start in the netherworld with the lord over it, Dirth Void, claiming that a new arrival will soon be on Earth, and that's important to sway them to his side. He tasks his lackey, named Batty, to go and guide the new life in order to be an agreeable ally. He heads out to Earth just in time for a meteorite to land atop a mountain, and out pops our main character, Congo, nicknamed Stone Monkey due to both his cradle and his skeleton being solid stone. And thus the game begins. To begin with, the game looks pretty sharp. It uses that shortcut a lot of PS1 era games used, where the overall gameplay is essentially 2D, but there's a 3D element, allowing Congo to shift from one of multiple layers to another, with objects in unrelated planes either obscured or darkened out as to not distract. But this might also work a little too well at times, as sometimes the paths to move between these planes themselves can become obscured or darkened out to the point where it can be difficult to even see where they are. Collectible items, like peaches or these weird coiled wire things, whatever they're supposed to be, are rendered actually in 3D, but others, like the extra lives, are just oversized images of Congo's face, and the actual on-field image of Congo and enemies are all 2D sprites. The overall style seems to be somewhere between Tomba and Crash Bandicoot, though I might be thinking that second one only due to the peaches. And yes, I know those are called Wumpa fruit, work with me here. Anyway, the overall designs are pretty solid. The way they're applied at times can come off as frustrating and counterintuitive, and we'll get more to that in the gameplay section here in a moment. Sound-wise, the game is overall a bit of a mixed bag. To start, I actually quite liked the show and game's opening theme song, which is performed by the Toms. I don't know, I think there's something really evocative about the line, "one heart beating in stone." Maybe that's just me. Anyway, the background tracks in this game are mostly just ambience. There really wasn't much in the way of music that I noticed per se, which was either surprising or a glitch in my copy of the game. That's not impossible, mine was a little choppy at points, including some voice clips that had playback issues, albeit inconsistently. All that said, one thing I appreciated was that the peaches played a different note when collected at random, and sometimes it lined up and was even kind of musical, especially as the peaches are healing items and often used to help direct the player on the level's layout, akin to Mario's coins or Sonic's rings. And it's a nice touch that they got the original voice cast due to the game's voiceovers, so nice touch. Some of the volume mixing leaves something to be desired, as Congo's struggling soundbite is a bit louder than it really ought to be. But best of all, every time you pick up an extra life, the game plays this musical monkey soundbite. It's hilarious, or at least it is to me. But all in all, decent sound. Not amazing, but not terrible. The core gameplay, as mentioned, is a 2D action platformer, which hinges on Congo's brisk speed and a set of magical gems that you'll get throughout the tutorial. By default, you can always punch and kick, with slightly different attacks being executed if you're ducking or holding up. This ends up being a little bit more useful than you might expect, as attacking enemies directly is always the hardest method of winning the fight. In fact, let's hash that out first. Congo has 2 meters, a white health bar which rapidly depletes and many times instantly does so before you get your first spells. But the game balances this in a number of situationally useful ways. For example, Peaches restore about a hit's worth of Congo's health, and the weird spiral doodle things completely restore all health and magic, and picking up an extra life also refills your health to full, which is generous if nothing else. Further, once you clear the first tutorial stage where you need to rely purely on Congo's athletic abilities to avoid bees and gatekeepers. No, I need to talk about this because both of these things lead to weird conflicting information feed back to the player at any given time. See, you can avoid the bees by ducking and rolling, but this mechanic is immediately invalidated because the first magic stone you get, the green one, lets you shrink yourself or other items, and there's no more gaps in the game where Congo will be allowed to just roll through them. In fact, the shrinking spell timing out while still in a gap is an automatic loss of a life. Wow, what a weird thing to do after teaching me that rolling is useful in this game. And then the gatekeepers, they basically teach you that to attack directly, head to head, is the worst option available. Jumping over their attacks and attacking their unarmed backsides is always the best advice. Though the game is merciful. If you die during this set of enemies, as you fight them each back to back, you pick up right where you left off. So I can't fault the game for being needless and punitive about its difficulty choices. But then we jump ahead to the reactor in the Celestial Heavens to obtain the Power Rod, Congo's signature weapon. And, this is supposed to be a tutorial level, but it takes an hour to clear. Along the way, you get warped back to the training grounds to get new abilities as they become relevant to your progress. All magic is executed in one of 2 fashions. If you use the L1 button to cast the spell, it will be cast on yourself, and R1 to cast it in the form of a projectile that Congo will send forward by default, but can be redirected up or down depending on control pad input. You'll start with just the green jewel, as said, which shrinks things. You can shrink enemies and reduce their power and HP, which is useful. Then you'll get the yellow jewel, which increases Congo's defense or makes fragile objects more durable, which you'll need to do in order to complete some platforming challenges. Don't use this on enemies, obviously, but this is also up and away the best power in the game. While active, all damage, even environmental, which is usually near instantly fatal, does scratch damage at most. There is no situation where you don't want this one on by default. Then you'll get red and blue gems coded to fire and ice magic respectively. And while you might think, wait, but isn't casting fire and ice magic on yourself bad and not very helpful? Well, on its face, it does sound absurd. But since there are fire and ice elemental hazards, which can inflict their elemental blight on you after contact, it can be used as a way of neutralizing those effects and not having to eat tons of damage in the process. Because this game loves it some environmental damage. First of all, falling too far deals damage, and no, the game doesn't warn you of this. In a 2D platformer, no less. A 2D platformer, the camera's kinda zoomed in a little close to start, and all the platforms are kind of overly large. Yeah. And going through the reactor level, you will repeatedly be subjected to radioactive waste and steam, which necessitates use of the yellow gem. Now you might think this is excessive given that Congo's magic bar is limited. Well, that might be true, except the game doesn't really ever want you running out of magic power, so there's platforms all over the stage giving you ample access to this stuff and restoring it whenever you need to. So you're never really in danger of running out, not to mention all the healing items you can find. So keeping the yellow magic buff on at all times isn't even remotely difficult. Now, what it is that the levels are not designed terribly well. In addition to not always being clear on if I should move forward or backward at key places, where being able to do so should have been obvious, the overall level design can feel slapdash and sloppy. Those moments early in the game where you're tasked with finding 5 keys and you need to scour all corners of the level, and it all just feels a bit excessive, might be the word. And it also feels like the level was made first, and then the keys were peppered in later. Also strange but true facts, when recalled to the temple for your training with the magical gems, you're told you won't even be allowed to save at these interludes if you don't have 40% of all the collectibles on that leg of the level. Not that that was ever really an issue, but I've legitimately never had a game threaten to take away my saving privileges because I hadn't gotten enough of the random extras strewn about. And since by the time this started happening, I had over 25 lives on hand, it also felt a bit pointless and random. And the level continues to feel that way for a while. I really only played for about 2 or 3 hours, and I just really couldn't anymore. Ultimately, it has charm, but only so much. It has some good ideas, which are weighed against a lot of bad ones. The game looks great, but feels a bit like a chore. It has some solid ideas, but none of them are fully realized. Just like the series itself, it feels fundamentally unfinished. Like they really wanted to do something with this and got elbows deep into the progress of the work and then just stopped. And what remains is a mediocre, unpolished game that no one bought or remembers. And in a way, it's kind of a shame. I was left feeling a little hollow after this. Much like I didn't get any closure from the series, I didn't get a sense of completion from the game either. It felt like a lose-lose all around. And ultimately, I couldn't shake the feeling that that was kind of too bad. Both the game and the series had so much potential that never got to be realized, and someone out there must be a fan. While the Wikipedia page of the game is less than a paragraph long, someone decided to write a very, very long and passionate essay about the series proper on the respective wiki page. So, someone out there has to still care after all these years. So, here's hoping that maybe someday, Congo will get a new lease on life. Or I can just, watch another anime based on the exact same source material, I guess. But it won't be the same. This has been the Stone Snack. And if you liked today's episode, be sure to hit the like button so I know. Did you know about this series and the game before now? Leave a comment telling me so. I'm legit curious who else encountered this in a similar fashion. And for more like this each week, be sure to hit that subscribe and bell icon so you'll never miss a one. There's more Obscure Reviews, NDX, Neck Tech, and the Tomodachi Bros Review Podcast Season 2 coming soon, all here and more yet to come. No matter what happens next, I will see you there.